Welcome everybody to our LBNL Community Advisory Group meeting for November. It is the last meeting of 2020. And so tonight, my name is Daniel Isofano. I serve as the meeting facilitator along with Maria Mayer of MIG, and we are the facilitator and note taker. Maria keeps track of everything and produces a written report afterwards, so we have a good record of the meeting. And plus we are recording the meeting using the Zoom recording feature. And just like as the meetings took place in person, when we go to the Berkeley community centers, we always had a videographer there to keep track of the audio and video. So we can put that up on the CAG website and in other ways refer back to any of the discussion points. So we're going to get started. We like to try to maintain our schedule as best as we can. Tonight, we're featuring the topics of vegetation management and wildfire research at the Berkeley lab. Very important topics, which I could say without a doubt that all of us have been affected one way or another this year, especially with the air quality. So 40 million Californians are now impacted heavily by wildfires in the state of California. My family, in fact, twice now in the last 3 years up in the Sonoma Valley had to evacuate our home up there. So we know it's a topic of great concern. We're pleased that the lab will be able to address that this evening. So we have a number of presenters, which we'll introduce as we get further into the meeting agenda. And we're going to ask, first of all, any CAG members who have meeting updates or news items that they wanted to share with the group. And as we've always done here with the Zoom platform, if you'd like to make a comment here during the update section of this CAG meeting, you can raise a real hand or a digital hand, as the case may be, and we'll get everybody into the discussion. And I know we do have some neighbors of the lab joining us, and we like to go through the CAG meeting agenda items first, and then in the course of the various presentations, we'll ask for CAG member questions or comments, and then we'll turn to you who are members of the community not on the CAG, and we'll make sure we get you all into the conversation as we go along. And we do have time at the end also for general public comment in case we miss anything important. So we'll be sure to catch everybody. So were there any news announcements, updates from CAG members regarding special events or activities that you all would like to inform your fellow CAG members and also community members? Any updates from anybody across the gallery here? And again, if you want to raise your hand or add the virtual hand, we can get you all in here. I'm not seeing any hands at this point. Usually we do have questions or updates or comments from CAG members. Nothing so far. Okay. All right, well, in that case, we'll jump right into the first discussion topic. And for that, we're talking about vegetation management and wildfire mitigation on the Hill. And Michael Brand, our Deputy Lab Director for Operations, and who is the COO of the lab, will start things off, and we'll in turn go on to the other presenters there, Jeff Philibert and Todd LaBerge. So Michael, why don't you start us off?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. And first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining this evening. This is a very important and timely topic for all of us. And I'm going to go here. We've all been at this we're in our 8th month of, first was shelter in place. The laboratory came through the early stages of the pandemic with a very reduced staff, and gradually we reintroduced workers to our laboratory. And over the course, since the pandemic has begun, we know that we've experienced some particular challenges, and those challenges are associated with wildfire in our region. I have been evacuated 3 different times in northern New Mexico for wildfire. And I know firsthand the devastation that it can cause in a small community. And so this is an important topic to me and personally and professionally, because we live in a region that has extremely high wildfire dangers. And so this year, each time that we've experienced poor air quality, we know that it impacts us in our community. But when I smell smoke, I think of hardships in communities where people are losing their homes, they've been displaced, and unfortunately some lives have been lost. And so as we go forward with this discussion tonight, one of the key items that I'd like to be able to share with you is that our laboratory is no stranger to vegetation management and wildfire preparation. And we have a number of speakers that will talk about what we're doing in operations, and then we'll share with you the experience we have from a scientific perspective. And our goal within our laboratory is to make our lab safe so we can continue our important national research mission. And each of us makes, you can see on this slide, meaningful contributions. And Jennifer Doudna is a recent Nobel laureate for her work with the gene editing technique CRISPR. And without the ability to keep our laboratory operating safely and being good neighbors to all of you in our community, we don't get to operate. And so part of what we want to share with you tonight are those things that we are doing to take care of our community, take care of our laboratory, and to be able to do very productive work going forward. And so with that, what I'd like to do is introduce Jeff Philibert and Todd LaBerge to talk about wildfire management at the laboratory. And I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to them. Okay. Jeff?
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. I'm sharing screen. Let me just grab my, there we go. And I'm going to go to presenter view. Okay, everyone can you see my slide?
We're good.
Great. So good evening. Tonight I will present a brief history and background on wildland fire management at Berkeley Lab with a focus on the past 30 years. Managing wildland fire risk is a matter of extreme importance to both Berkeley Lab and our institutional neighbor, UC Berkeley. One major reason for this is the 1991 East Bay Hills fire. This calamity was a devastating reminder of the dangers of wind-driven fire at the urban-wildland interface. Thanks to a shift in the winds and the efforts of so many people, this wildland fire was stopped at the edge of UC Berkeley's Hill campus and very close by to Berkeley Lab. Although Berkeley Lab had always practiced good fire prevention, this event spurred us to dramatically increase our efforts towards managing wildland fire risk. So following is a brief list of some of the planning, the actions, and the commitments that Berkeley Lab has undertaken since 1991. Our efforts always start with good planning. We became a founding member of the Hills Emergency Forum in 1992. We retained regional experts to help us formulate an effective fuel management strategy. The strategy was aimed at making the entire Berkeley Lab campus a defensible wildland fire break to the benefit of both ourselves and to our neighbors. We devised a campus-wide wildland fire management plan, which we are currently augmenting with a new vegetation management plan. We established an emergency operations center, along with better emergency procedures, improved emergency communication systems, stepped up training protocols, evacuation and shelter in place plans, regular disaster drilling, etc. Shown here are members of 2 of our 4 Berkeley Lab disaster assistance teams. We followed up our planning with decisive and impactful actions. We constructed 3 200,000 gallon gravity-fed water tanks for fire suppression. These tanks provide pressurized water to the entire lab and would perform even if a major seismic event were to cut us off from East Bay Mud's water supply lines. We embarked on aggressive annual thinning of eucalyptus and non-native flammable trees, and we replaced those trees with native, drought-tolerant, fire-resistant trees like coast live oak and coastal redwood. We also increased our annual vegetation management on the ground, including cleaning up of leaf litter, pruning ladder fuels and tall grass, and removing invasive brush. We use every eco-friendly method available to us, from machinery to handheld tools to grazing with herds of goats. In addition to taking actions, we've stepped up our commitments to combating wildland fire risk, including continuing to maintain a fully staffed and equipped on-site fire station. Also, adopting cooperative relationships with neighbors, including by providing fire and emergency services to UC Berkeley and through an automatic aid agreement to the city of Berkeley, and by taking on additional responsibilities to make the entire region safer. For example, in 1996, we added 66 acres of adjacent UC woodland and grassland to the lab's management area. Our intent was to more aggressively manage these areas, including through the use of federal resources, to help create that lab-wide wildland fire break, which was our strategy. We have removed hundreds of eucalyptus and non-native pine trees in these new areas since. The area in green here shows the lab's management area extent prior to the 96 agreement. And this slide shows the full extent of the lab's 202-acre management area following the transfer. So again, you can see what we took on. So for the past 24 years, Berkeley Lab has expended a great deal of our resources to annually maintain and control all 202 acres within our management area. We stretch our limited resources as best we can. We bring in federal dollars and support, and we base our actions on careful planning and expert opinion. We have much still to do, but we've come a very long way since 1991. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Berkeley Lab's Fire Marshal, Todd LaBerge, who will speak next, and we'll be pleased to take your questions at the end. Thank you.
Very good, thanks, Jeff. And Todd will get his screen up on the main show here. So we'll just give him a few seconds to do that.
There we go. I believe you should all be able to see my lead slide here.
We're good.
So thanks, Jeff. High level, I want to cover what the Berkeley National Laboratory is doing as far as mitigation and preparedness and the actual on the ground items we've been doing. And a lot of it dovetails into what Jeff just shared, right? So real quick, what we're going to talk about, for those who aren't really familiar with the term WUI or wildland urban interface, we'll talk about the problem and then what the lab is preparing for, some of which you heard from Jeff. And then in the totality of everything that the lab has done, what we are doing now, and what we will continue to commit to do in the years to come to help mitigate the wildland fire risks. One note though, I'm going to show a couple of videos that show real wildland fire evacuation scenarios, one from Fort McMurray fire in Alberta, Canada that burned over 1 million acres. And another one is just a grass fire in Texas, but it gives a really good visual representation as to how healthy trees aren't really infected by wildland fires and how dead or dying trees are, right? And so what is a WUI, right? As we know, it's a zone where structures and human development meet and intermingle. The entire East Bay regional hills and a large portion of all the state of California. What you're looking at here is the Coffee Park neighborhood in Santa Rosa, which may sound familiar because in the 2016 Tubbs fire that came out of Napa Hills, this is what it looked like after the fire, where some 2,000 homes were lost. The Coffee Park neighborhood, if you can tell, this is not a hilly environment. This is literally the flatlands just outside of the hilly environment, sort of by Annandale State Park. Right, so the entire region is considered part of the WUI. It's not just if you live in the mountains. So perception versus reality. We all have imagined or seen the photos. So wildland fire perception, we've all seen people fighting a fire with a garden hose thinking, oh, I can protect it. Not a big deal, it's water, it's fire. Problem is, this is the reality. So this is the level of fire that the Berkeley National Laboratory is preparing for to help mitigate and serve as fire break. So here is the Fort McMurray fire evacuation. I wanted to share it. And it can be a little unsettling, but it gives a very real view of what we're looking for. So here, this is in Canada. So I'm going to run the first 10 seconds here. This is where the people are starting to leave their neighborhood, but look at the embers. This is what we call the ember storm or the ember shower. This means you're not going to walk out of this fire like this. If I advance a little further, this backward view, this is a 50 or 60 foot tall wall of flame. And then they start to move, and they are moving in an orderly manner because it's Canada. And then down here, this is what the gentleman is driving away from. This 1 or 2 trees here or there are not going to prevent this type of wildland fire. It takes a holistic approach, right, of the entire region. And so this is what Berkeley Lab is working towards. I'll move back to my slideshow here. And so the WUI issue in the East Bay, we all know the strong winds. We have narrow canyons, dry brush this time of year. We've all heard the term a red flag day. There's a picture of some of the signs we installed. This is actually on one of our outgoing gates to remind our staff and personnel who do live in the area that it is a red flag day. Be mindful when you go home. It's when it's very hot, very dry, and very windy generally. We've had 7 red flag days officially, and so far in 2020. 13 times since 1923, there have been Diablo-driven winds, the offshore winds. I have driven a fire out of the East Bay Hills down into the neighborhoods. This is what we're preparing for. And so some of the issues we have forest overgrowth. This is a picture from 1909. Very few trees, 50 to 80 per acre generally. There's some low-lying grass and the gentleman out here with his horses. But if any fire comes by, it just keeps moving right by the healthy trees. There's no what we call ladder fuels to let the fire ladder up into the canopy. So 1958, a little bit more growth. There's some in the bottom corner what we call blowdown. And then 1989, a fully grown out forest. Lots of competition for resources. You can see the tree on the right here is dead. And so I mentioned the healthy grass and fires. So what I wanted to show, healthy trees and fire. This is a Texas grass fire. Let me pause and switch screen here. I find it easier to have the videos outside of the presentation. That way there's less lag. So this is a grass fire driven by about a 10-mile-an-hour wind in Texas. And you notice the fire just moving along, okay, not involving any of the healthy trees, just keeps moving by them. But then it hits this dead tree here. And as soon as this grass fire hits it, it ladders right up into the canopy. But even the healthy trees right next to it, no problem. The fire just keeps moving right on by. Not a problem until it hits other dead trees in the back. This is the sort of issue we're worrying about. So if we can get rid of this ground fuel and we can reduce it, then the potential for fires to get up into the canopy is also reduced. Right? Let me switch back to the presentation here. And so this is the strategy that we're using. And so our past efforts, as Jeff talked about, we've removed hundreds of eucalyptus trees. We've done significant amounts of ground cover reduction and removal. These are 2 of our sites. This is above our building 90, and this is sort of in what we call a chimney of fold, right in the middle of the campus above the big C. You could see the eucalyptus stumps. You could see the open grass. There's no grass covered down towards the ground. So if should a burning ember land in here, it has a very low chance to propagate or move. So what we've also done, even in the past 10 years, every one of these red circles is where the lab has either done what we call understory clearing. We've limbed trees up. We remove all the lower limbs up to about 8 or 10 feet off the ground. And we've removed trees. We've improved our evacuation routes. $8 million worth of effort in just the past 10 years to help ensure all these dangerous areas or areas that we find of a higher risk are reduced. Right? So by doing that, some of the other recent efforts, we talked about vegetation management, as Jeff did. And you can look in this left corner here. This is right above Cyclotron Road, right where we merge with the campus. And you can see these eucalyptus saplings. We have trees with bark shredding off of them. There's some ground cover over here. Afterwards, we removed all this ground cover. And so again, should embers fall, there's very little potential for anything that might land in the grass to go vertical into the canopy And a small grass-borne fire can literally be put out with a shovel. And a road serves as a great fire break. And here is our, I believe Jeff called it our natural vegetation management plan through the use of the goats. And what we're also doing is all around our perimeter, we're taking actions to reduce the ground cover, reduce the fire threat, both from the lab into the neighborhoods, as well as from the neighborhoods onto the lab property. So we can continue to maintain that break. And here are some shots from the inside of our property fence line and right outside in some unkept areas. But so I have a goats gone wild video. Everyone likes the goats. These are a shot of our 300 head of goats that we hire. They come in every year. This is when we're moving them down from that area, right towards that area where I just showed. That's this area down here to the left. The goats didn't do that particular piece of work, but here are 300 head of goats, and we have them every June. They move all throughout the lab, and they create a great low-ranging fire break to remove all the grass and these ladder fields, as we call them. So this is actually posted on YouTube. So as I move back, all of this is starting to paint a picture of the totality of the actions that the Berkeley National Laboratory is taking. And so additional efforts, as Jeff mentioned, we have leadership in the Hills Emergency Forum, the region-wide cooperative group from East Bay Regional Park, City of Berkeley, City of Oakland, also Bronte, the whole area, Tilden Park as a function of East Bay Regional Parks, Arinda Moraga. And this is, we understand this is a regional issue. We focus on partnerships for the entire East Bay Hills. And we continue collectively for this annual fuels reduction. This photo here on the bottom is looking up towards Grizzly Peak Boulevard. Here's another sign of, another one of our fire danger signs that we alert our employees and our contractors about red flag days. And so some of the infrastructure that Jeff talked about, and I'll jump on as well, is all of our new buildings, as required by the Department of Energy, are non-combustible, made out of concrete and steel, except for very few exceptions. All of our buildings have fire sprinkler protection. They all have non-combustible Class A roofs. Jeff touched on our 600,000 gallons of on-site water. We have 85 fire hydrants and 2 fire pumps to help provide fire protection water. And our roads and our buildings, as I mentioned, serve as an active fire break should a low-level fire happen to occur in the lab. And we have this comprehensive vegetation management plan that we've put together. And so one other thing we realize is if we do have a wildland fire, what we realize is we don't necessarily want to impact our neighbors if we put 1, 2 to 3,000 people in their cars to leave. So we've developed the concept of site evacuation maybe not being possible. So we have 6 different zones, and we have a 7th zone that's offsite. And with buildings we've called safe buildings, where our employees can shelter in place and be safe to help free up the evacuation routes for the community as a whole. Right? And so what can you do? One final slide. I would be remiss as a fire marshal if I didn't try and share a public safety message. Right? We talked about fuel management and reduction and collaboration. What can you do around your property? Create your own defensible space. Be aware of embers. Right? Home improvements you can do. And here are a couple really good resources that you can pursue. Firewise USA is a great nationwide collective program where the neighbors can get together and get resources and grants and funding to do local wildland fire management. I'm happy to help at any time with any questions the neighbors might have. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and stop here to save an additional amount of time for questions at the end.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael, Jeff, and Todd. Really good information, excellent. And we appreciate that information to help us all be fire safe. So I wanted to use the time, first of all, for the CAG members. If you have any questions or comments for the presenters, we can take those. And then after we hear from CAG members, we'll go to the broader group of people, community members who may be attending this evening. And so once again, if you raise your real hand or the digital hand, I'll get you recognized and we can start the conversation that way. Does anybody have a question or comment for any of the presenters here? And any information to share that would add to it? Okay, Sarah Moore with the City of Berkeley, go ahead. She's longtime CAG member. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. That was really fantastic presentations. And I think the inclusion of those videos was wonderful too, to really get to see that demonstration. So thanks, that was great. I heard recently that the event that happened, I think it was just over 2 weeks ago. I know it was over the weekend when there was the very high wind, the red flag and the high wind danger. My impression was that the city of Berkeley did things a little more proactively than usual and really encouraged residents. And I heard that the university also encouraged residents to come on down out of the hills if possible that weekend. And my impression was that that was generally considered pretty successful. I assume that you coordinate also with the city on that, and just curious whether you had also taken efforts, you know, either that time or you know, just kind of your thinking on that as well.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. I'll answer that. So Sarah, thanks for the question. We have closed the laboratory 2 different times for weather-related events. And in this case, this was related to the potential for wildfire. And we take the warnings, the advisories from the city very seriously. So we have many of our laboratory staff live in the hills, but also our laboratory is located in the hills. So when the city issues an advisory about leaving the hills, that gives us, that tells us that we need to pay attention. Number 2, we decided that we would close the laboratory because of the environmental conditions. And it was extreme winds, and there was a high potential for wildfire. And so we supported the city by closing our laboratory. And then this was earlier in the summer, we had another case where when we had that, there was another extreme weather event that was coming. And so we decided to curtail operations on a Monday morning. And then the weather event, which was mostly wind and possibly some lightning, similar to what we had in mid-August, didn't really occur. And so we reopened the lab mid-morning. So what that demonstrates are 2 things. One is we are partnering with the city through our actions. Our emergency operations center does communicate with the city, and through an abundance of caution, we are always going to support the city and protect our staff and protect the community. And that's an example of what we did.
Okay, great.
Perfect, thank you.
I see a hand up from Marcos, another longtime CAG member. Go ahead, Marcos.
Yeah, so we're on Panoramic Hill adjacent to on the next hill. Basically a valley separates us. Very proactive community. One of the things that I see that's difficult is this cross coordination between the city, the lab, and the UC. Mainly because it seems to be, at least in the last 6 years, that we're heading into a season. We head into a season if it's dry. This is becoming a seasonal event. So what I'm asking is a little bit more coordination and like a timely event to bring awareness to the local community, especially on the south side and north side, adjacent to campus. You mentioned that there's a lot of lab employees around in these hills as well, but there's a lot of students that come into the university that are really unaware of the circumstances that are possibly becoming, event-driven on an annual basis. And it'd be nice to see coordination of some kind of outreach program that has things like, this video being put out, or things that become just an annual event. And it's difficult because school does start in late August, but it does seem like timing it around that on an annual basis to outreach through the UC to the students would kind of help. We've seen kids walking up the hills with candles in September, to do a night outing in the hills. It's just, we do see things that seem ridiculous on our end, but you have kids come from all over the country that aren't really aware of the WUI district that we are in, and the UC is pretty much included in that. The high winds that we reach up here are significantly greater than even just 400 yards down the hill. So I'd like to see you guys take it a step further. I think this is great. All the progression and all the information that you just covered is fantastic. I
Yeah.
just want to see a more formal outreach towards the local community to just bring more awareness on an annual basis.
Very good. Thank you, Marcos. Did anyone want to follow up on that, Todd or Jeff or Michael?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up, but Marcos, I think that's an excellent suggestion. And as someone also who lives in the hills, and I cycle in the hills, and I see the danger associated with fire at the overlooks. And I know that had become a major issue in our community. And I like the idea and would support the notion of bringing the laboratory campus and the city together to raise overall fire awareness, not just for the students, but for our community as a whole. Because as someone who's lived through wildfires, it really does take all of us working together and raising awareness and taking actions to support fire prevention and fire awareness in newcomers to the communities, whether they're students or people who are just moving in. So I couldn't support that notion more. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Any other CAG member comments? I see Rich Setstro. Okay, go ahead, Rich.
Need to unmute myself. So Jeff, Jeff or Todd, I have a sort of a detailed question for you having to do with, at some point, it seems to me there's a place where you start worrying about, if you clear off too much vegetation, then you start worrying about mudslides and erosion and things like that. I don't know where that balance is. I wonder if I certainly, as a longtime Berkeley lab employee, I certainly remember the goats and seeing, that they leave behind a fairly closely cropped, but not stripped vegetation. But it seems to me there is a point at which the lab needs to worry about, I'm sure you do, worry about landslides and erosion.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, Rich, I could take that, and maybe Todd too. Two quick points. One is we do exercise at the lab a 1-to-1 tree replacement policy, typically for trees in our wildland areas. And of course, as mentioned, we take out typically non-native trees like eucalyptus and non-native pines, and we replace them with native, drought-tolerant, fire-resistant trees like coast live oak and sometimes coastal redwoods, that sort of thing. The second point I'd like to just make as well is that if you look at old pictures of the hillside that the lab occupies, there were no trees except for in the riparian areas at that time. So this habitat can actually really exist quite well without being heavily forested in terms of the erosive issues and that sort of thing, if we manage it well from our side. And we like to think that we're doing a lot of planning right now for transitional biological planning. What system are we going to? If we get rid of these eucalyptus hardwood forests, how do we transition to something that's more sustainable and more natural? Thank you. That's a good question.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. Diz, did you want to comment on the same topic or a different topic? Go ahead, Diz.
It's slightly different topic. Eucalyptus grows back really fast. You cut it down and there are 4,000 sprouts. So what do you do about that?
Okay. What's the method that the lab is using to treat those eucalyptus seeds?
Yeah,
Jeff?
so that's a great point, and that's a constant battle we fight. So while we do not use any spray herbicides at the lab as a policy, the only way to stop eucalyptus resprouting is to paint the stumps with a topical herbicide, and we do that, and we're also constantly doing maintenance and vigilance to try to prevent resprouting.
Okay, very good. Well, we still have some time here. Are there any further hands up? And Henry De Niro, I see a hand up, and we'll take community members as well who are not on the CAG. Go ahead, Henry, please.
I'm not on the CAG. I am a community member. I thought the CAG members were done.
Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
Okay, so I live at 2695 LeConte at LeConte and La Loma, which is just downhill from the labs in the hills area, about 2 blocks off campus. And I hike the hills on both sides, the north and south side, frequently. I kind of know all the terrain. And a couple of neighbors and I initiated a recent meeting. I think some of you on this call were at the meeting, and I know Jean is aware of it because she helped coordinate it. We met at the parking lot, the Vista lot, at the Hall of Science, which is not on your property, but it's the area that I'm concerned about, that the neighborhood's concerned about. And we met in a pretty strong Diablo wind on the day we met, so it was kind of prophetic. So what I'd like to do is first acknowledge and appreciate your efforts to date, and the fact that this is a regional problem, and we don't dispute that. And I'm extremely encouraged that the experts here have talked about eucalyptus trees repeatedly. And one of the things that particularly got my attention, because I've been here for 4 years now and I know where all these trees are, but most recently it got my attention by a friend who was actually in the Oakland fire and went back over the fire lines to get her dog out. And she said that the eucalyptus trees were literally exploding like firecrackers as the canopies lit from canopy to canopy. And when there was a grove, they exploded like a string of firecrackers. Pop, 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 pop. Because when the canopy ignites, it literally explodes. And it can ignite either from coming up the trunk, which, as you know, eucalyptus does with its dry bark, or it can ignite through embers in the air and then just go canopy to canopy. So I'm really glad you appreciate the particular danger and nature of this tree. And I'm glad that I'm hearing you've cut a lot of them down. Now the area, and let me just acknowledge also, you've done a huge clearing up on Centennial, you know, where the Math and Space Center are, down to where the Hall of Science is. You've cleared a lot of those eucalyptus out, and that's exactly what you need to do. There's an area that is partly on, so the area I'm going to focus on is partly UC Berkeley responsibility and partly Berkeley Labs responsibility. And part of it is virtually invisible to anyone driving or walking. It's in a hidden canyon. And the area I'm talking about is an east-west line, east to west, downhill from below the Hall of Science. And it's actually, this is the UC Berkeley part because it's just outside your fence line as you go downhill from the Hall of Science down the mountain. You'd be on, if I was going downhill like a hawk, you'd be on the left and the hill would be on the right. There's a large group of eucalyptus down that line. There's another grove on your property, on one of your access roads that you can easily see from up there. There's a big grove of eucalyptus there. And then if you move to the north, there is this hidden canyon, and you have determined that part of it is now actually Berkeley Labs' responsibility outside your fence line. And your fire people know about this, and when we had the meeting, they acknowledged it. And they're currently resurveying it, and they actually have a plan to do ground clearing and cutting saplings in this area. And it's just north of your parking lot 90, I believe. It's in kind of in the northwest corner of the Labs property. If you go to the fence line, you can literally look into this canyon that no one can see but you, that goes right down to the top of Hillgard, which is the beginning of the neighborhood, where the La Vereda Hillgard area is. And that canyon is full of eucalyptus and full of dead eucalyptus and full of ground cover. And apparently half the canyon closest to your fence line is your area under an old memorandum of understanding. The other half of the canyon from the ravine back uphill toward the north is private land. And apparently there's a building permit. Susan Mungraff tells me that there's a building permit that if somebody builds a house there, they're going to have to clean it up. So my plea is that you can not just continue the work you're doing and the broad planning. My plea and I've made the same plea to UC Berkeley, because this is not all you, is to go look at this area again. I know your people, the fire people, have already looked at it and they're thinking about it, but I would encourage Michael Brandt and Jeff to go walk it. You got to get your hiking boots on, or go to the fence line from parking lot 90 and study it, because I think it is a particularly dangerous area that is right at the densest part of the North Hills, Berkeley neighborhood. And if any of those trees ignited, either out of tilt, by embers coming through the air or by a ground fire, there's a couple of hundred eucalyptus, and they're all in close, it's not a continuous grove, but it is a series of groves that are very closely proximate to each other that could literally cause a chain reaction and blow a massive firestorm right down into the heart of the Berkeley Hills neighborhood, just north of the campus.
Okay.
And so it seems to me the plea is to look at that specific area as a surgical area, remove the trees, not just do the ground cover, view it as kind of an urgent area like you did with the Centennial curve up above.
Okay.
Get rid of them. That would be the strong plea, and you'll get no neighborhood resistance. You'll only get support for that.
Thank you very much, Henry. That's
Thank
a complete description. And I know we are trying to stay on schedule, but maybe just a quick comment. Alice, you were requesting a few words here on the same subject. Alice?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I would just really like to thank the labs for being so diligent in their maintenance of this area. It's so dangerous, and we all know that. Rebuilding Together, I'm the board president. Rebuilding Together has a lot of clients up there who are in their late 70s, 80s, and even one in here 90s. And they all have mobility issues. So we work really carefully with them about evacuation plans and trying to make sure that they are aware, or their family members who may not live in the area are aware of, some of the time-sensitive dangers going on. And so I really, again, just want to thank the lab for being so incredibly responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. And you remind me that this is probably one of the few places where we have the UC Berkeley campus, the lab, the Hall of Science, Berkeley neighbors, the city, everybody together in one forum. This is fantastic, and the way this CAG has evolved. And so thank you all for your participation this evening on such a critical subject that we all are affected by and worried about constantly, given these climate change conditions. So I'd like to move us on to the next item, wildfire research at the lab. And Margaret Torn, a senior advisor to the Climate and Ecosystem Science Division at the lab, will start us off on this. And here we are actually doing fundamental research on this very topic that certainly is going to inform our efforts going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Margaret. Do you want to share your screen and we'll get underway?
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And it's nice to see all this interest. I guess you're mostly interested in the neighborhood, but I'm glad that you're here to hear about our research as well. I will share my screen, give a presentation. Yeah, so as you've just heard, I'm Margaret Torn. I'm in the Climate and Ecosystem Sciences Division here at Berkeley Lab, and I'm an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. By way of introduction, I also live in Berkeley, and as we heard from previous speakers, share the same experiences as all of you do. Also in 1990, I published the first modeling study of how climate change might affect wildfire in California. And we predicted that even with more investment in suppression, that the number of escapes or fires that escape initial suppression would about double. And it's an interesting sensation to be at a point in my career where I can see that we're actually on track for those unfortunate predictions. But I hope that we can do better. So as you heard from Todd, wildfire is a very multifaceted phenomena. You have the ways that fires start, like ignition and using human behavior like power tools. And as I was telling Jen, also now gender reveal parties have to be included here. You have the fuel that can burn. We are mainly studying wildfire, so the natural fuel, but of course houses are also part of that. And then there's the weather and climate that determines how flammable that fuel is and how fast the fire spreads and how hot it burns. And then there's wildfire behavior, of course, and its outcomes, the frequency in the area as mitigated by management and suppression. And then there's a whole host of impacts from fire. And all of that is kind of the the universe of research that we're doing here at Berkeley Lab. So we know that wildfires are increasing since 1970 in the West. Wildfire frequency, and these are fires that can be seen from satellite, have increased 400%. And the burn area has also gone up even more, 600%. So at Berkeley Lab, we're contributing to California state knowledge and also solutions in 3 main areas. First, the impacts of wildfire on water and on air and on our energy system. Second, wildfire prediction to understand near-term and longer-term wildfire behavior and its impacts on vegetation, and then how climate change might affect wildfire. So what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a survey of the kinds of research that we're doing. There's little highlights, and I won't go in too deep on anything, but give you a survey of these areas. And I'm going to start with water. Fires affect water quality and also water flows. Fires, they make the metals and toxics in our houses and in our environment more mobile. We get melting, combustion, volatilization, and also chemical transformation. So all of these are releasing material into the environment which can run off into waterways. In addition, just the burn itself changes the infiltration of rain into the soil. So it changes runoff. And on the right-hand picture here, you see a photo of a ghost of an oak tree. So it's the ash that's left behind. So it even takes all the minerals that are in the trees and releases them in kind of a burst when it rains. One of the things that we're doing is helping Sonoma Water, which is the Russian River area, understand the effects of wildfire on their water quality. So you see a photo of Michelle Newcomer, who's leading this research, and she is testing streams for the toxic metal sediment and also nutrients. So in this plot right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see it? Somebody
Yes,
not.
you can.
All right. What you see in this plot is the x-axis here, these sort of funny acronyms are just different river reaches in the Russian River watershed. And the dots are showing the amount of mercury in the water at different sampling time points and locations in the river. And in these different rivers. And what you can see is that here in the blue, this is the only unburned watershed that was sampled, very low mercury, and every other waterway had higher mercury that we think was increased because of fire. Now, we didn't have pre-fire sampling to determine this for sure. And so we now have a grant from CAL FIRE, who are keenly interested also in the effects of wildfire on the watershed, to do some pre-fire sampling, and then we'll do post-fire sampling. So these results are going as next steps to Sonoma Water, so they can think about what's happening to water quality where it has burned, and we'll be working with CAL FIRE to communicate results of these new surveys. Wildfires also change watershed yields and the stability of soil, not just because they burn vegetation, but also because they change infiltration and soil properties. So we have a project, and here the lab has invested its own laboratory directed funds to get this work started, because it's so important to understand how the watersheds function. These are results from Faji Maina and Erica Cirilli Woodburn, and they're showing that after a fire in the winter, we have more snowpack, and in the summer, more runoff. So I know you can't actually see these plots, but the point here is that we're learning in detail how the burned area, loss of vegetation and its effect on the soils, is affecting watershed yield, but also on the soil stability. So when we think about the terrible landslide events like they had in the Montecito area, we're starting to learn about what's controlling that and the areas that are at highest risk, and to be able to predict those risks. So the next step in this research is to begin to work with water areas that have burned to help alert them about their risks. As we all know keenly now, wildfires threaten air quality, and it's outdoors and it's also indoors. I know most people don't have their picture showing, but I was curious how many people either bought air purifiers indoors or wish they had one, because the air was yeah, the air was really bad and beautiful in this case, but really bad for our health. And the lab has been doing a lot of work starting after the campfire to help the community understand how we should manage our buildings, how to protect ourselves, and also how to assess the risk. So this is just an article. I mainly wanted to show you the view here. This is a view of Berkeley Lab right after the campfire on the left and 3 weeks prior. The most recent piece of work that we've been doing on the Hill is to look at what are considered lower cost sensors for air quality. And I should mention here that one of the main pollutants for human health from wildfires is fine particulate matter, which is called here PM 2.5, or particulate matter that's less than 2.5 microns in diameter. And the state-of-the-art sensors that are used to measure particulate matter cost between $10,000 and $20,000 each. So even the EPA, which is monitoring air quality, doesn't have very many of these around the Bay Area. But you may have also heard of things like purple air. I don't know how many people tuned into the purple air maps. These are based on lower cost sensors. They're $200 to $300 each. And individuals are buying them and then reporting the data. So, but there was a discrepancy between what Purple Air was reporting and what EPA was seeing. So Berkeley Lab did a study to compare 4 lower cost sensors, including the Purple Air sensor, and compare it to this benchmark expensive sensors. And what they found was that there was a really nice linear relationship. It just wasn't one-to-one. But what this means is they could come up with a standard adjustment factor. And once they used that standard adjustment factor, the Purple Air sensors went from being about 14% accurate to matching the EPA to 84%. So the EPA factor is now available, which is based on the EPA and Berkeley Lab, is now included on the Purple Air map, and it's useful for using any of these lower cost sensors. The next topic, as I'm sort of doing this survey, is about the effect of wildfire on the electricity system. And until recently, the focus regarding energy was how wildfire is damaging transmission and distribution lines. And that's because it is a substantial cost. The current average annual cost, averaged over many years because it's episodic, is about $1.8 billion a year in damage to California's electricity system from wildfire. And with climate change projections, this is would be expected to go up to $2.8 billion per year. So quite a lot. And this is work that was done and provided to the state of California Energy Commission for their energy planning. But I think, as we all know now and have been keenly aware in the last 5 years, is that many wildfires also started by the energy grid. And in fact, just as an example, 12 out of 17 fires in the October 2017 fire siege were started by PG&E infrastructure across the state. So it's a serious issue that Berkeley Lab's energy technologies area is now looking into. Finally, I wanted to turn to predicting wildfire in California, predicting ignition, the weather, the fuel. And just to mention, as you've probably heard, Berkeley Lab has state-of-the-art, world-class computational facilities. And one of the things that we're doing with those is increasing the resolution of models. So whereas climate models had been running at 4 by 5 degree, it's latitude by longitude degrees, shown in the lower left here, we're now up to climate models that are running not just, here's 25 kilometers, but very close to this 2022 goal of 1 kilometer, when it really starts to look like the state of California. You might ask first, has climate change increased the risk of California fire yet? The answer is yes. It's actually increased the risk of fire throughout the West, and this is work that Berkeley Lab did on detection and attribution of historic trends and was provided to the US National Climate Assessment. So you see here many different Western regions. I think it's interesting here just to point out the California region looks flat. You don't see an increase in large fires, where here the large fire is 1,000 acres. But that's probably because we have had an increase in fire suppression. So this is the number of fires, but we're still seeing a very large increase in the number of damage from much larger fires. So we're able still to put out small fires, but as you see, when a fire escapes that initial suppression, it can go on to become a large extreme, and those are increasing in the state and the area burned. And those are linked to wildfire weather changes that are attributed to climate change trends. So what will happen in the future? One thing that we are thinking about, especially, I'm sure everyone is since August, is lightning strikes. And lightning strikes are actually projected to increase by quite a lot throughout the US, by about 50% by 2100 due to climate change. Yeah, not good news, Todd, huh? No. And this is a combination of convective energy, the amount of energy in the atmospheric system, and the amount of moisture. So there's a nice metric that we're developing and testing, convective energy, or CAPE, times precipitation. So it's kind of simple. And, but yeah, it's not a good prediction. I guess fortunately for us, the largest increases will happen not in California, but a little further east, but still it's something that we really need to keep our eye on, especially in California, where about usually in a typical year, 90% of fires are started by people. So we're not used to thinking about lightning as the primary concern, but we've seen that we really do have to pay more attention. The next little highlight is on weather. And the Madden-Julian oscillation is the scientific term, but you may know these storms as the Pineapple Express. These are energy and water waves that are coming from west of Hawaii, and there's Hawaii, to the coast. And with climate change, what's happening is they are predicted to hit the coast higher or lower than they are now in ways that will increase the extremes between rainfall and drought, meaning our wet months are predicted to become wetter and our dry months are predicted to become drier. And that actually is a especially bad combination for wildfire because wetter winters mean more fuel growth. And then drier summer is more fire weather. Let's see, Jen, I did not turn on my timer. Can you give me a sense of how I'm doing on time? Or maybe I should be asking.
You're doing fine.
You have a few more minutes. Keep going.
Right, I only have 2 more slides, but I just wanted to check. Okay. So the next thing that and the thing that we are doing the most work on really is predicting future vegetation. So where will we have shrubs, grasses, trees, and what kinds, and what state will they be in? And how will wildfires affect vegetation? So those links. And this is, I think it's natural that we're so interested here, especially because California has just amazingly diverse vegetation. It's one of the reasons that I don't know, that I love the state, and it's really characteristic, but it makes it a very difficult challenge. So we have a very large group that is doing modeling and field work on the effect of wildfire on vegetation and how vegetation may burn in the future. And it's a combination of many different approaches, spatial approaches, detailed modeling at a site, and larger scale predictive modeling. And I'm just going to show you one result. This is a result of using a technique called machine learning, which I think you could consider it's kind of a poor person's artificial intelligence. We're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence, or you can think of it as fancy statistics, but it's a nice way of learning and creating a module that can do work for us. So this machine learning module was constrained by our process understanding of wildfire and a lot of other information to create a smarter, more efficient way to predict fire risk and burned area. And here you're seeing results for the whole globe of many different regions. And then the plot is showing the observed burned area from satellite data versus our predicted burned area. And you can see that this new machine learning version is doing a very good job, and it's 90% faster than and more accurate than the previous version of just process-based wildfire model. I think what's really exciting is, although this was developed for climate change prediction and global or system models, we can now start to apply this just in the state of California. So we can take something that we've produced for a different audience, for this global audience, and apply it to understand more about fire in the sort of 3 to 12 month window, which can be a very difficult prediction window. Finally, fire is also very important for how it affects CO2 emissions and climate change mitigation. Maybe you saw very recently the news that Newsom had announced a plan to conserve 30% of California's land and coastal waters. This is for biodiversity, but the other big reason was to use lands for natural climate solutions, to have carbon sequestration in forests and soils. At the same time, we're investing quite a lot in fuel reduction of the kind that you heard in the first half of the hour. Well, those trade off against each other. Forest management to reduce fuel load takes carbon that is stored as plant biomass and ends up resulting in decomposition and return of that biomass to CO2, which is a greenhouse gas. But whereas for the climate change mitigation, we want to increase forest biomass. So what our modeling is showing that we have been doing for the state of California is that while the fuel load management releases CO2 in the short term, it does lower wildfire emissions in the long term. So it will just have to take a long view of that trade-off. And at Berkeley Lab, we did this work at the behest of the Department of Natural Resources. And this work was used in the scoping plan to produce California's climate change mitigation goals. So I'm really pleased that we can play a role in that part of the process and help try to prevent some of the climate change impacts I mentioned. So in closing, I just want to say, I think Berkeley Lab research and Berkeley Lab scientists are providing evidence-based information to local communities and agencies, to the state and federal entities, which they are using to assess wildfire risks and which we can use to protect our health, environment, and economy. So I thank you for your attention.
Very great. Thank you, Margaret. I really appreciate your presentation. I'm sure the whole CAG and the community members here also do as well. And maybe before we go to the questions, comments, you could also just briefly introduce your colleagues, Michelle and Robinson, who are here and could also be part of the question discussion here following the presentation.
I'm thinking they may have left me here on my own. Michelle and Robinson, are you here? Because I didn't see their names on the list.
Okay, well, they were listed on our agenda, but they're two members of your Climate and Ecosystem Science Division at the lab. So it sounds like a really good team that you have put together there. So let's go and turn to the CAG members first. Any comments, any questions for Margaret in following up on her presentation? Again, a hand, either real or digital. Let's go with Diz Swift. Go ahead, Diz.
Unmute, thank you. Thank you for that really interesting presentation. And I am so grateful that the lab is linked in with the state and providing the data that we so desperately need in order to figure out how to go forward in the most effective way. And Newsom's 30 by 30 includes natural and working lands and forests. And the big question that I'm always getting anyway is, okay, forest fires emit CO2, of course, and then they reduce the vegetation. And so, of course, the net is negative, but do we have any anything reasonable? I mean, it's very difficult, and this is a non-trivial question, but CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions net related to forest practice, especially wildfire occurrence.
Yeah, that, if I understand your question, just how do those trade-offs in the end play off against each other? So the only comprehensive result that we have right now was hinted at the last result slide that I showed you, which is that initially there is a large increase in greenhouse gas emissions, or of CO2 in particular, from fuel thinning and prescribed burns. But the ability to prevent really large catastrophic fires in the end results in less CO2 emission and more forest biomass. That's the protection part. But California will have, as this double-edged sword, I think, in being able to take advantage of good management of forests and rangeland to help us prevent climate change, which means we want to count it, you know, in our carbon goals. But it means we're taking a little bit of a risk, because when there are fires, then we don't meet our goal that we've sort of committed to. So that's part of why I think the detailed modeling that we're trying to do can help us better understand what commitments we should be making on the basis of natural and working land carbon sequestration.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Additional questions, comments? I see a hand up with Marcos. Why don't you take it away, Marcos?
Unmute. I'm taking the wrong part of the screen there. Thank you so much. It's a really great presentation. It's great knowing that it's difficult to explain or express out there into the world how complex problems you're trying to solve. One of them, I'm not sure really how to ask this. So in terms of like you're doing a long-term play of trading off short-term risk for a long-term gain and trying to get captured. Is there a model also set up to relative zones and native species and their actual risk for fire because they're native species to replenish with the proper species and what their carbon capture is relative to their zone or their environment? I mean, do you have a map or is that part of your calculations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The standard fire models and actually the standard vegetation growth models tend to have very few vegetation types, like a grass, a shrub, a deciduous tree, and an evergreen tree. But especially here in California, we know that we have a much more rich variety and diversity of plant life that grows at different rates and is flammable in different ways and under different conditions. So part of the work that we have done is to start modeling different vegetation types that are specific to California and in the combinations that we find in California. And to do that in a way that is what I'm going to call a demographic model, meaning we're not just modeling the intact large forest, but also regrowing forest. So by demographic, you know, think baby trees, teenage trees, and adults. And those things are very important because some trees are more vulnerable to drought, let's say, and some trees are more flammable or communicate to crown fires better. So that's actually a big part of our research and why we have such a big team working on the vegetation side, is to make it work in California, just like you're saying. The standard models are too coarse in the vegetation, and then I also showed in the about the just a little image of the model resolution. We actually really have to model at very fine spatial resolution, which takes a lot of computing power because we have complex topography and this complex mix of vegetation. It's a long answer. Did that approach your question?
Yeah, I think it's probably even a longer answer than that. But just taking all those things into consideration.
But I guess that is why it's a research topic, and that the operational models that CAL FIRE has aren't enough for us now, and really trying to think it through.
In just to continue in the long term, some of the I'm trying to remember the lab work that's being done to look at the biome and how it's affected by all different types of conditions, mainly more natural conditions. So I would assume that in the long, as that information starts coming out, that becomes part of your modeling process. Are you guys tied into any of that research that's going to be?
Of which research? I'm sorry.
The growth, there's like these growth labs that we were talking about in terms of looking at how biodiversity of the environment goes to a microbiome level, and looking at how trying to isolate the potential for regrowing or reestablishing forests. I think is something that
Yes.
sounds like we're kind of just at the infancy of knowledge of that, when we actually need to be really pushing hard in that direction.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Anyways, thank you for this. This was really informative and great. I have a million questions.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Marcos, for those comments and questions. Any other comments? We're doing good on time, and there are a few things we wanted to do with all of you CAG members before we wrap up this evening. So we will need a little bit of time for that as part of the final item on the agenda. Additional points for Margaret and her team?
Yeah.
Okay. Looking good. Well, once again, Margaret, thank you. Great presentation, terrific information, and it helps to round out the event. We are going from prevention to response, recovery, and long-term research to inform all of those efforts moving forward. So it's a very nice combination of presentations this evening. So thank you all for that. So there were a couple things we wanted to ask you about as CAG members, since this is the last meeting of 2020, and we will be finally bringing 2020 to a close, heading into the new year. Our next meeting is January 11th, so mark your calendar, and we will be putting out a full set of dates for the new year. I won't go through all of those this evening, but you'll get some emails from Maria Mayer here at MIG to just remind you of that. But we also wanted to get your ideas about topics for 2021. So we have 5 upcoming CAG meetings slated, as we have in this year and in previous years. And we'd like to get your ideas for some of those meetings and what are the topics of interest that you would like to see us address. And we certainly welcome presentations from all of you as CAG members from your respective organizations. We've done that very successfully in the past as well. And just to recap a few things that we've done, you know, we've talked a lot about the STEM programs that the lab is participating in with local K-12 schools throughout the East Bay, and the potential for engaging young people in science and other related disciplines here at the lab. We've talked also about the ways in which the city and lab could participate together in terms of energy reduction and making more energy efficient city buildings. Just to name a few, we've talked about the Strawberry Canyon and how we're managing development at the lab site. And so all of those are pretty standard items we've developed from time to time, but we're open to new topics as well as old chestnuts. So what are your ideas moving forward? And we'll try to set up a CAG syllabus for the 5 meetings coming up in 2021. Any ideas that you want to all put forward? There's no bad idea at this point. Anybody? We need your input so we can fashion these presentations and topics going forward. Let's go to Julia. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'd be curious about the sort of labor and workforce development components of all the different construction projects that the lab has going, and what the entry-level job opportunities look like at the lab, particularly from a building and construction perspective. And then, yeah, any types of labor agreements or community benefits agreements, community workforce agreements, things like that, that the lab may have in place.
Mhm. That's very good. Yeah, and we've touched on that in previous CAG meetings, but we could fashion some discussions and presentations around that. Great. Any other topics? Marcos?
So we're going to go through for an administration shift. So might not be available in January, or maybe the second meeting, an update regarding any changes or directive from the executive branch in terms of funding, in terms of protocol of any changes that come or occur. It'd be nice to be updated.
Okay, very good, thanks. And we do often start with a fresh take on the view from the lab as a whole, and so it would be appropriate for something in the new year. That's great. Other ideas? Diz, go ahead.
Well, the perennial question of climate change, and Margaret gave a wonderful presentation tonight of one element of it. The natural and working lands and drawdown is a piece of that. Water is a piece of that. There's not going to be one meeting that will cover all of it, but to continue to look at how the lab is contributing to the state's understanding of mitigating and adapting to climate change.
Okay. And lab's influence on state policy, I assume, would go along with that, Diz?
Yes, please.
Excellent. Other ideas? Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have a lab presentation on the topic of the coronavirus. And I think there's a couple of things, and there's probably more, but a couple of things would be interesting would be what role the laboratory, what the lab is currently doing in that area. I know of a couple of projects, and maybe to try to bring everybody up to date on both the question of if there is somebody at the lab that's tracking this, what the sort of the prognosis looks like for things like a vaccine. I know there's been some recent announcements about that out of Pfizer, I guess. And then the other is, I know a couple of my colleagues at the lab have gotten involved. Well, they have some LDRD money to look at coronavirus spread and the efficacy of masks and things like that. So that would be interesting research, I think, to know about. I mean, we're not out of the woods yet, so.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Rich. As you know, we did have that as a topic early on during the year and the early parts of the shelter in place, and be good time for an update on all of that. Great. Other ideas? Sarah, go ahead.
Some things that I have enjoyed in the past, and so just sort of would advocate for having some updates on as well, do include things like equity and diversity. It's really took me a while to sink in what you shared last time, and I must say I have remained worried, hopeful that you have been able to retain Lady and your other amazing staff, and that there's a pause but not a discontinuance. And Michael, it looks like maybe you want to speak to that, or?
We are continuing our program. We paused a couple of trainings, but our program is alive and well. And I will reassure you, and we will be more than happy to present what we're doing. We're quite proud of our efforts at the laboratory involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we'll be able to speak to that. Okay.
Wonderful. I do really appreciate those. So I would love to hear more of that. it's less relevant right now, but in general, I do like hearing periodically about transportation in regards to the lab. Oh, sorry. Try to hang up on them. Except I can't. Apologies. We'll just ignore that. What else? I like, oh, we've heard occasionally research, especially about things like batteries. If there's an opportunity for refreshment there, especially in regards to electric vehicles and the like. In general, research that helps support decarbonization in buildings. I don't know if you have anything going on regarding, you know, cement alternatives or the like, but we in the city of Berkeley have now for the first time required lower carbon embodied concrete. So that might be something of interest, but of course, building decarbonization and thinking also of electrification of buildings. I think I'll stop for now. But those are some things I like.
That's a great list. We've captured all of those. Thank you, Sarah. Any other topics? Okay, well, I think we are coming down to the end of the meeting. Sarah, let's see, Jeff was asking about what aspect of transportation you're most interested in. Could you maybe expand on that topic? Transportation, are you talking about to and from the lab?
Yeah, generally, exactly. So generally that's what we've heard about, and it's been interesting to hear, you know, how the carpool program has evolved, and you know, the support for biking, shuttles, the expansion of that program. As I said, obviously that is very altered in this time frame, but I would like it to be retained as something of interest. And then I did also just want to do a public shout out and thanks to Jen and Michael for providing me more information and follow up to last sessions. I was really impressed by what you are doing in terms of pandemic response within the lab and the information that you are sharing with your employees and really with the public via your website. So I did take some of that back to the city of Berkeley because I think appropriately, you know, for the most part, the city of Berkeley's response was really focused on getting resources to the community and getting testing available in the community. And I think that our work internally, just to get information to employees and about workplace practices, weren't as strong. I was able to use some of what you have done as examples, and that's been improved on our end as well. So just wanted to give you a public thanks for that work and let you know that it's had positive influence that I am personally aware of.
Thank you, Sarah. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, any other final thoughts regarding next year's topics? I think we've got a pretty full schedule here. Looks like a graduate course when we put all of these together, and there's a lot to choose from, and we'll try to sequence those as best as we can and try to fit those in the 2021. With that, I think we are going to wrap things up for this evening and also for the year. It's been quite a year. I think we would all agree to that. And we look forward to a successful 2021. And we hope everyone has safe and wonderful holidays in a possible safe manner, given all of the different headwinds out there and safety issues. So we hope you enjoy the holidays coming up. And we hope to see you all in 2021 at the first meeting, January 11th. So mark your calendars. We will maintain this new time and this new format for the foreseeable future. So once again, we'll have meetings starting at 5 and going on to finish by 6:30. That seems to have worked out very well. And we look forward to keeping this group alive and maintaining the representation of community organizations and municipalities and all of the institutional representation we have here on this CAG. So thank you very much. Have a great evening and stay well and stay connected.